because we're both mental health clinicians. Caroline has her PhD, and as clinicians, it was very apparent to us what was going to happen, but only because that's what we do. I always say it's easy when you know how, right? So one of the biggest things we want to do today is like reduce any guilt or shame of like, oh, I should have known this or I should have done that. Like, you only know what you know or what someone teaches you. So like, we're going to get rid of the shoulds. I mean, I think that's a really good place to start. So I have been in private practice for about a decade, and I did nonprofit work before that. And actually met Dr. Caroline Danda when I took my daughter to see her for just like an assessment. And the minute I met her, I was like, this is what I've been looking for. You and I practice the same, and it's very hard to find, I don't know, it's all about match. And so a clinician should match your personality, and not everyone is right for everyone. But she was perfect for us, and now my daughter can no longer see her because we've written books together. We just both are very passionate and lucky to love our jobs. Like, I don't think there are many people that get to say that. And so I had written the first book, I had it almost finished, The Invisible Riptide, which is meant for kids and adolescents and older people as well. And we have designed Q&As that include just a basic one about how to talk to your kids about feelings. We've included a Q&A to help with cancer, because that's something that we see a lot in our practice. A Q&A to do suicide prevention in a way that parents are comfortable with, because the age is actually getting younger and younger, and starting at 10 for females, it's the #1 cause of death. So we did that, and then we have one more that we did too, didn't we? Grief and loss.
Grief and loss.
Because grief and loss has changed so much with the pandemic, because it's just the layers and layers and layers. So then we decided to write From Surviving to Vibing, Filling in the Gaps. And this talk is about self-care, but the reason I'm going to bring it up is we will reference, there's guides to finding what self-care looks like for you. But as part of your self-care, we know, my favorite book, The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse. Isn't it odd that we only see the outside when nearly everything happens on the inside? And when you're a tween or a teen, you don't want to talk about the inside. So this book,
or you may not know how.
Yes.
I think that's also trouble for a lot of our tweens and teens, is they don't know how to figure out what's going on. And they don't know what they don't know still.
Yes, and they are all emotionally and socially behind.
Right.
But the good news is they're all behind together, so they're going to make it out together. But this is a guide to their inner world, and one of the things that I have loved doing is kids will take a Sharpie, and when I say kids, I mean sometimes I'm talking about a 25-year-old, and they'll underline what is important to them in one color, and then in another color they'll underline what they want their parents to know about them, and then they keep writing and adding. And so this isn't a self-help book, it's a self-discovery, and this is why you are the way you are, and you're not alone, is what it is. So yes.
I totally forgot to tell you guys that if you guys are okay with it, you guys can take off your masks.
Oh, okay.
Just because we're far enough away. Is there anybody that would rather them keep their masks on? Okay.
We are fully vaccinated and boosted, and I've had
that way
COVID.
people who watch online can understand you probably a little better.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So that's kind of where we are, and Caroline, I'll let you kind of start if you want, or I can start with this whole thing where I think
just go for it.
Okay.
You're ready.
I'm ready. So,
but this is, I will say, but this is why we work. Is we are in tune with each other, and Carron coming into my life was also a godsend for me, because we really feed off the energy of each other, and we really support each other. So we're talking about this type of thing, and again, a lot of time women supporting women, and parents supporting parents, and we really feel a good support for each other.
Amazing.
And we're not competing.
No.
Right? I think sometimes it's a little bit of a comparison. Sometimes we go there, but we talk
also
about
then are like, oh, we're competing.
Right, or we're comparing each other.
Yeah.
We don't say we're competing, but we'll notice oh, I'm feeling a little bit wait, maybe you're doing more than I am, or this or that, or
Yeah.
I wish I could, but we talk through it. But we have this connection that's been really beautiful for me and
Me
her through this too.
Yeah.
And we couldn't have done what we're doing in terms of being able to spread our message and spread passion and be able to do these things if we weren't doing it together.
Absolutely.
And I think that's one of the biggest messages also that we have through our books is that connection, especially a lot of what was lost in the pandemic, is so important to rekindling.
Yes.
So sorry, I jumped.
No.
I said go and then I jumped in.
Well, and the other thing, when we're talking about normalizing and reducing guilt and shame about all these feelings you have, we both only work with normal people, right? And these words are from people that are all normal. And, you know, I'll just read out, and kids, teens, parents look at these and they're like, oh my gosh, yes. So, like, everyone my
What
age.
page is that?
This is page 9. So, everyone my age is feeling depressed or anxious. And I feel weak and like I should be able to handle this. I feel so overwhelmed. Bad things keep happening. I'm not doing enough. I feel lazy and unmotivated. I need a break from everything and everyone. I feel trapped and stuck. I feel isolated, alone, and don't belong. I feel like I'm defective. Everybody's having a huge slew of those thoughts.
And even those came from a lot of teens. How many of us can relate to having those thoughts?
I can relate to every
right?
single one
Like
of them.
those are all thoughts that we all have. And I think it's really powerful that they're written down in a book, because we don't write books for people as an individual. We write it because we see that it's happening a lot.
Yeah. So to just use that to kind of reduce any guilt and shame. I know I'm a working mom, and you know my kids are my top priority, but there are times where, you know what, it had to be the iPad, and we were in survival mode, and so anything you did, you were doing the best you could. And you know, your kids are resilient, and the best part about the brain is we have something called neuroplasticity, and you can change and strengthen different parts. So even if some parts weakened, you can strengthen them. So there's always this hope that we can help our brain develop if we're aware of why it's that way, recognizing a pattern, then we can develop a pattern that works best for us. And I just think that a lot of parents feel like, oh my gosh, I'm the only one whose kid is struggling. Because even though the pandemic has helped people normalize mental health, our generations are still not comfortable. The kids are. And that's why it's called filling in the gaps. Because adults don't often share their struggles as much. And we are meant to thrive in a community. I mean, there's a reason that there used to be a 3-to-1 adult ratio in communities of raising a baby. It's not easy. And so being alone and isolated impacted everyone in some way. And re-entry, I think people thought, oh, yay. And it's like, no. It's worse to feel lonely around people than to feel lonely at home. And so it just remembering that awkwardness is a normal part of social interactions. Awkwardness is part of any transition, even a happy one. And that everyone feels awkward, they just show it in different ways. And we only see the outside, but all we do is compare to the outside. That isn't, it's rarely indicative of how the inside is.
Right.
Except for me as a tornado. That is indicative of how I roll. Caroline can attest to that. And so I think it's kind of, you know, taking our power back, and instead of, you know, I will say I've gone through grief and loss and hard things during the pandemic, and I don't want to take away from that. Made it really hard.
Yeah.
And we have some resources on our website. We have a lot of free resources there, but it's time to go back to hope. And so The Invisible Riptide was written for hope, healing, and connection. And this book is written to take your life back and reprioritize and look at like what fills you up, what are your values, and what are the things you want to keep from the pandemic. Like, I know I want to keep playing family soccer, and I want to keep having more dinners at home, and I want to keep doing that a lot. You know, I realized that I was being way more social than I needed. It wasn't really me. I'm an ambivert. I don't know if you guys have heard that term. It's like, I'm not a pansexual. You know, they have all these other terms. But an ambivert is, an introverted extrovert. I recharge by being alone, but I have extroverted parts and needs. And so the other thing is, the self-care plan for you is not going to be the same as the person sitting next to you. And we have been, our society kind of subtly and not so subtly forms thoughts for us that we're constantly comparing ourselves to others. And so that creates a lot of anxiety and just not feeling like you add up.
And there's a lot of shoulds out there. There's how many different things that, you know, have told us, this is how you get your health and wellness. There's so much conflicting information.
And there's not a
right
one
answer or
side.
wrong answer. One of the things I like to think too, in terms of thinking about our own self-care, is we have to meet ourselves where we're at. We may not like where we're at. We may see that we have things we want to change, which is fantastic if you can identify that. That's strength, being able to identify, I'm in a place and I'm not sure I like where I'm at, but I want to go somewhere else. So we have to be okay and accept this is where we're at. But I'm also ready to move forward. One of my favorite analogies is really thinking about life as a book. And, you know, this is a very challenging chapter for many. And, you know, it's important that we recognize that any good book has lots of challenges that propel the protagonist to change and grow. And so I look at this as a challenging chapter, and we need to breathe because we can navigate through it. But it doesn't mean that it's not hard or that we don't need support. And the more challenging thing about life relative to a book is we can't cheat and read ahead, right? If we could read, how many of you, if you like knew like a year later, oh, things were gonna be like this and it's gonna be better, right? Wouldn't that be so much easier? But we don't know that. But I also feel like that's where the hope comes in. That's where your faith comes in, is that we can't read ahead, but we have hope and faith that we can work through and navigate these times, whether it's this time now or whether it's a time later. And I would say even throughout the pandemic, I mean, there's been ups and downs that have been more intense and some things that have been good. And we're gonna have those ups and downs.
And that's life.
And we wanna embrace the parts that are hard and celebrate the parts that are also working for us and celebrate the moments that we enjoy. And when something negative happens, we don't want that to just overtake everything and bring everything down. I also really like the image of the yin yang because it's all about balance of light and dark. We really can't have too much light and we can't have too much dark. And if you're feeling off and you're feeling out of balance, it's a little bit about, okay, I'm out of balance. What do I need? What do I need to shift? Am I overthinking and focusing so much on trying to figure out the bad parts that I'm overlooking some of the good things that are going on, that I need to balance the dark so that I know what's going on?
And when we talk about the brain too, from an evolutionary standpoint, we are hardwired to focus on the negative.
For sure.
And we just kind of brush over the positive. It's like, oh, that was great, but okay, I'm moving on. But you can rewire in the sense that the more you focus on the positive and the longer you stick with it, the more likely your brain is going to look at it. So that's another thing that's really important. And you can model that for your kids too by kind of like talking out loud, celebrating your own successes, celebrating with them. And, you know, I think it's okay too. Sometimes there's not an answer and we just have to embrace the suck, but you don't want to get stuck in the suck. So embracing the suck means this is hard right now. We'll get through it. Talking about it, because the more you ignore your thoughts or feelings, the more they grow and the more messages your body sends. But if you talk about them and pay attention to them too much, the yin and the yang, that also makes them grow. So it's being aware of them, but also for people that go the other direction, setting a time limit on it, you know? So it's all about balance.
Right.
And I think that's really important. And I think the other thing that's really great that you kind of were speaking to, one of my favorite books, and I talk about all of my favorite, I love to read. So I have like a million favorite books, but is What Happened to You by a neuroscientist, Bruce Perry. And we're all developing post-traumatic wisdom. And what helps people have depth is going through hard things, because when we fail or go through hard things, our brain changes and grows. So this isn't actually even a bad thing. I truly think our society was headed in a really kind of a...
There were other things going on that this is a good reset, because we did come back and we were like, maybe we do need to reset and we need to figure things out. And the initial part of the pandemic, we're like, oh my gosh, it feels so nice not to have to run around.
But only if you still had your job and you
Right.
still, I mean, so that's.
Well, I mean, it was a brief moment, and then you're like, okay, that was nice, now I'm done. Even kids. Even kids were like, oh, this is cool, this is awesome, I get all this time. But they're like, and then they were like, I miss school, right? It gave kids actually, I think, a little bit of a newer appreciation for school in some ways. In other ways, not so much. They also.
So if you were prone to anxiety, the avoidance created more anxiety. And so that's where this book and where our talks is, when people say, teach me what you do, I'm like, I can't, because it's different for every single person that walks in the door. I can teach you like different skills and things, but I think so often we just lump ourselves in, and we need to realize that we're individuals and to not compare. And I think the other thing that book I was talking about says, like, the most positive protective buffering factor for even like a kid who loses a mother, anything like that, is having a church home, having a sense of community. And so, and that's because our brains link up to each other's brains. When she said, let's take a deep breath, she was feeling the emotional current of the room, probably mine. I was like, frantic.
Oh, and mine. Yep. It was all
And
there.
when we sit there and we calm, we even catch the calm of the person.
Did you guys feel how the room did calm?
So we can.
And I'm gonna build, if I can.
Yeah.
I'm gonna build on that. One of your best kind of like self-care is not, this is part of our self-care thing, is like, you can't always take an hour out or have bubble baths or other kinds of things. And one of my really favorite self-care things to do is do exactly kind of what I did there, is in between activities, take a cleansing breath, kind of clear your mind, feel your body go down. Like, I very purposely will breathe and then actually feel my shoulders go down. And I kind of like, who knows Marie Kondo? You know her, so her thing was all about joy and things like that, and getting but also getting rid of stuff. And so I love the way she would be like, oh, journal, you've been so good to me, thanks for being part of my life, and she would put it away, right? And we need to do that with each moment that we're going through the day. So as I breathe in, I'm like, okay, good, that was over. I might say, oh, that was really hard, or that was awesome, but I can appreciate the moment for what it was, and now I'm ready for the next thing. And it keeps us focused. Completion. Right, it keeps us focused where we're at, and it's easier to deal with where we're at now than having to go, how many of us live in a what's next world? Is it managers of the household? What's next? What's next? What's next? So it's hard to have that enjoyment because we're so busy. And so self-care is like appreciating each moment that we have, whether it's hard or not hard, and then like, okay, now I'm ready to move to the next. And it'll give you a sense of calm throughout the day that might help fill you up. Just try it and see. And then if you do that with your kids and model it, don't tell them to do it, right? Because they're good. But if you do that in the car, or just what I did in here, I was just like, you know what, I need a breath, so I'm just going to do that. Right. And you guys all followed along.
and I often do that with kids too that don't want to talk. I'm like, well, I have this other kid and they're your age. Like, what? I'm stuck. Can you help me out? Like, there's always a way to stay in a metaphor or to talk about a character in a book. You just get creative. But this just, when we're talking about this, we're also talking about, find your balance and be mindful, which are on page 42 and 43. And I think that this is really important. The pandemic, like most challenging life experiences, makes it virtually impossible to be present with so much information and uncertainty. Consider whether gathering more information is either necessary or helpful. Who or what is the source of your information? Is it reliable? Everybody needs help with this right now, especially as we come back to like, what is normal? Everyone's like, we're gonna go back to normal. No.
Like, how many of you are searching on Ukraine nonstop? Right? And so that this is a great place where we need to put that in there, because we can go down this endless stream of searching for information, but it doesn't change anything. Right? If you don't find out information about the day until like, oh, you know what, at 7 o'clock, I'm just gonna see what's on for the day. Is that really gonna change anything for you?
Well, and be aware of how much time you're spending on things.
Right.
That goes back to the social media part where I tell kids, like, don't report into your parents, but you should look at your phone and see how much of your time you're spending on every app. Like, this is important information for you to gather to figure out how you want your life to be controlled. But if you feel overwhelmed, chances are that your thoughts are not staying in the present, but rather reviewing the past or predicting a terrible future. Mindfulness essentially means paying attention to the present without judgment. You can plan ahead, but don't need to worry ahead. So if you're in math class, then think about math. If you're having a conversation, put your phone down and focus on the person in the conversation. Being present makes it easier to follow the conversation and know what to say. Be where your feet are. Do one task at a time and focus on what you can control in the moment. Put your phone down and turn off notifications more often. It's not normal or healthy to be available 24/7, even if you are free. And then it speaks to what Caroline said, like try breathing between activities. And the ability to be mindful is key to gaining self-control and a feeling of a sense of peace. And so that's where our publishers were like, okay, wait a minute, with both our books. They're like, I'm like, no, it's not a kid's book. No, it's not a self-help book. No, it's not a teen book. These books are different because they're kind of whatever you need it to be. But I think that the Ukraine example is, you know, you can be empathetic and be disturbed and do certain things, but at the end of the day, if you hold on to that and you don't observe it and not absorb it, it's going to overtake you, and then you're just spreading more yuck. So it's not selfish to still spread joy. That is what the world needs. And honestly, doing nice things feels good, and it spreads happiness, and it's the little things. And so we can have two big feelings at once, like this deep sadness, and still allow ourselves to have joy, because that's what's going to get everyone where they need to be. But sometimes I think people get so stuck because they feel so guilty of, well, these people are suffering and here I am, you know, doing this, that, or the other. And I think it's really good modeling for parents. And I also think that something that's really great to teach our kids, which I love that we came up with this, is that really, really, really caring kiddos like to try to fix everything for everyone. And so to say, you know what, I know you want to fix this, but you're actually doing them a favor. You could be compassionate and walk alongside them, but if you fix it for them, you're robbing them of an opportunity for them to learn and have their brain grow, you know? And so we have to think about that with our own children and with our spouses.
Yeah.
And that frees up room for us too, to not feel like we are the fixers. And with that too, I love asking yourself, is this emotion mine or is it someone else's? And if it's not yours, let it go. You don't have to hold that. Like, I think that's a really powerful skill to learn. Is
my emotion being impacted by the reactions of others? It's a very similar and related concept.
Yeah.
But very important to be able to separate that out, and understanding. This is actually one of my favorite. That's my second favorite page.
I have kids. It's so fun too.
What page is that, Carron?
Sorry, this is page 41. They like don't know that I wrote it, and they'll be like, "This is awesome," and I'm like, "Oh, it's genuinely you like it." But I had a 16-year-old boy take a picture of, here are the tips to help gain perspective, and he's keeping it in his phone because it's so hard to put things in perspective sometimes because the emotions feel so big. And so teaching your kids this, and then
modeling it.
What we were talking about over here is that whole idea of like co-regulation and emotional contagion, and just bringing awareness to that. And you know, you could even say to your kids, like, you know, you may notice mommy's really stressed out, but this has nothing to do with you. I just had a really hard day. And if you don't say that, they're like, I did something wrong. I'm bad. So communication, keeping things open, but also respecting when they don't want to talk. Like tone, timing, and delivery are the most important things. And so when you talk, you also don't, if it's something that you're trying to really find more out about, you don't want to be like, okay, we're going to sit down, and everyone's going to share this, and it's going to be super awkward. Instead, you want to do it while you're driving, or you want to do it in an organic moment.
Or just, playing catch or throwing a ball, or, if they like to color or cooking. I've got teenagers, and I love to get them involved in cooking. Because I feel like we can have conversations, because while we're doing things, sometimes we're like, I need you to look at me. I'm
Right.
talking to you. I need you to look at, and that actually kind of creates a lot more awkwardness, because sometimes hard topics, it's very hard to look people in the eye. And so if they have something and they're fidgety, or, you know, they want to do other things and move around, that's normal. We need to allow that. Now, if we're giving them a direction, I need to use their name and get their attention and maybe give them touch so I can give them a direction. So I do want your eyes if I'm going to give you a direction. But having conversations about topics that might be difficult, it's really normal to have movement as part of those. It helps us regulate.
And it helps us like experience it on a deeper level that is stored in our body. So it's more integrated when we do that. And just in general, like nature is such a wonderful place to, when we talk about self-care, to get outside every day. I mean, and you can be on a walk, you can be doing anything and talking to your kids. And then when we talk about tone, even if it's something that you're mad about, wait until you're calm enough so you can use a tone. Because if they feel like, oh, I'm being judged, they shut down. The message is lost. So
part of
tone,
self-care
timing,
is
and delivery.
Take care of yourself before you feel the need to figure out what's going on around you. And you'll feel more settled, and you'll be better able to access the parts of your brain that help you do that. Because when we're emotional, we're gonna go down into that more deeper level brain that's automatic, and it's got a little bit, even if you're not in full flight or fight mode, there's parts of that are activated that make us more reactive instead of responsive.
Because our brain
reactive means we're not thinking it. Responsive means we've thought through it. But the natural tendency is for us to react. We're pulled, right, to react. So I'm giving you all permission to pause and take that step back and know that you're going to be better if you can think through things than if you react to I need to fix this now. I need to get this figured out.
That's where I want people to look at their budget even. A lot of times we think we're splurging if we're finding a way to have an hour to ourselves. But look at what you spend. Maybe it's that you don't buy 2 things from the grocery store to get that hour of self-care. There's not a price on happiness, and without emotional safety and meeting our emotional needs, physical safety doesn't much matter. So I would encourage you to find ways and talk to your spouse. Maybe you take turns, and one night, you get a night. There are ways to do it, but it's really, 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 really important that you schedule you time, not just once a week. And you know what? We're all out of gas. We're all tired. And I think another huge thing that people are feeling right now, and I know I'm even feeling this a little bit, but my niece about 6 months ago was diagnosed with cancer, and she's 6 months old. And normally my friends would have brought food and done all these things, but they're barely surviving. And so you're not getting that support that you normally would get. I didn't take it personally because this is my job and I knew that was going to be the way it was. Happy to say she actually successfully went through chemo, and they're taking out her report, and she's coming home today, which is a miracle.
That's
because
amazing.
When she was first diagnosed, it was a less than 1% chance of survival. So, but that's an example of normally people would come together, but everybody's so tired that we're not giving that to everyone else. And so just to remember too, this isn't personal. It's not about me. It's about they're in the same spot I'm in. Don't let it bring you further down to think people don't care. They do, but I think it's true to assume everyone's doing the best they can. And yes, that looks different, but we don't know what's on the inside. And so it's just really important to remind ourselves of that. And really simple acts of kindness go a long way with yourself and with others. So I think that's really, really important. And
we've got about 15 minutes left technically, is that right?
I was gonna say really quickly, if you guys want to take a look at page 44 and then break this down for me and think about which things are going to be most important in your self-care plan. That might be helpful to have you identify some goals, and then we can have a little bit of time for Q&A.
Yeah. So one of the things that we want to do is think about, if we identify what's important to us and we consider what we value and what's important, that's going to help us make effective decisions for what works for us. But we have to have an idea. We can't have a destination. I mean, like, we can't figure out where to go if we don't have a destination. And that's where we identify what's important to us and what we value. That helps us make choices that fit with us in the long term, versus getting pulled into maybe short-term choices that may not lead us to the destination we want.
We have to be flexible. I think that's one of the really big things the pandemic has shown me. We have to have grace for others and be flexible. And that's something that I think we had lost. And we just need to remember that. And I think making a list of things that you enjoyed, or having, like, as a family, we sat down and it's like, okay, well, what are you going to miss the most? What do you want to keep? You know, and just kind of modeling those conversations and, like, coming back to your values and having them drive your actions, I think is really important, because sometimes we're just like, wait, why am I doing this? But because everybody else is.
Right.
So we think we should be doing it. But, like, is that really right for us? And I think that's a good time to figure out what is right for you and your family and all of that. So, I mean, and you can take a minute later too. I don't want to have you look through too much of the book while we're trying to talk, but I do think the whole idea of, like, starting each day fresh is so important, and so important to model for your kids. Even when you're in tired, like, even if you change into other tired mom clothes, just the fact that they're new tired mom clothes, even if, like, you literally just have time to wash your face and your armpits, that's starting fresh. Like, so sometimes it's not big. And I think also to just remember to speak to yourself like you would a friend. You would never talk to a friend, my guess is, the way you talk to yourself. And we talk about that in the book as well. You know, and we have some quick tips that go a long way for parenting, and the reason we included those, it's on the first page, is just so that when your life is less chaotic with your kids, ultimately you feel better. But I think it's so important for you guys to have not only the permission, but, like, the task to prioritize yourself. We've been in survival mode, and primary caregivers haven't had time. Like, I know that I was like, do I work out or be with my kids? So then I decided, right, then I decided, okay, I'm gonna work out with my kids. So we started playing tennis together. You know, use your creativity.
Till you land on what works. Life is all about trial and error. We can't forget that. We're not supposed to have it all figured out.
No.
It's all about trial and error.
And it's making new chapters and making new memories. And I think the other thing,
choose your own adventure.
Yeah, the other thing that we really lost, and I think that we need to go back to, is so much of, like, the simple important things that we want to live by have been lost. It's called generational wisdom, and they're lost because we don't take time to sit and, like, have an actual conversation. And some of the biggest life lessons are just teaching your kids in the moment. And so kind of just going back to the simple things. And I think that another important thing is, as a family too, to help them learn how to become good consumers of technology. I really urge people to do that, because I think it's a safety thing, the way that we teach kids about body parts and we teach kids about everything else. We just really need to teach them and talk about things. And if they don't want to talk to you directly, that's why we love these books. Like, here's how I feel. I don't want to talk about it. Would you text me later? Sure. Or when you're ready to talk about it, will you let me know? I love when parents say their kids are super anti-therapy and they find the books circulate in each kid's room. They actually want it. They just don't want you to. If you say, here, read this, they're like, no. It's almost, hey, I got this. I heard it's super cool. I'm going to leave it here. If you want to read it, take a look.
Right.
With any book, with anything. And that's part of their age. So I think just really talking to yourself like you would a friend, making time for yourself, and having grace, and giving up this guilt, blame, shame thing, because we've all done the best we can. So I think that's really important.
Hope
Yeah.
to move forward. That's kind of what our message is.
and the importance of a church community. You know, we are meant to live in communities. That's the way our brains are designed, and that's how we thrive.
And that's why the title of the book is Vibing instead of just thriving, because vibing has this connotation that you're thriving together as a community. And that's a really important thing, that it's important that we try to figure out how do we find those communities again. Because they've changed too. They've changed, not just for our kids, but also for you. Sometimes, like, the shapes and the dynamics of different groups have just changed over time. And so it might take some time before you figure out how things are and what makes sense. And maybe you're like, well, this was great before, but maybe it's not a good fit now.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of that where people are like, ooh, I'm supposed to be happy about this. Well, if you're not, you're not. And happiness also is a really misunderstood feeling, and I think
it's a feeling.
Exactly. So it comes and goes.
Like all
I think
feelings.
Kids are like, oh, you get married, you get the white picket fence, and it's like, no, marriage is hard. And I think that's where the generational wisdom has been lost, is like, talk about what's hard, because if you don't, people think that they're defective, you know? And I think it's just finding that comfort within yourself too. So any questions that anybody has? Yes.
I'm really intrigued by this idea of, is this emotion mine or someone else's? Because I think as a mom, you hear that phrase that you're only as happy as your least happy child. And like, my teenager came home yesterday and he was crying, and I saw him crying in his car, and then it like tanked my emotions.
And what I will tell you is, you're a mom, so that's going to happen at first. When it's your kids, it's harder. However, most kids don't talk to their parents because they don't want their emotions on top of theirs. So it's like, I don't want to tell you because then I'm going to feel your distress, and I'm distressed enough.
Right.
So that's where you wait till you can check yourself and not project your hurt onto them. So that's a beautiful question that answers several things. It's much easier to dismiss someone else's emotions if it's not your child. But if it is your child, it's really important to regulate yourself first, because we don't mean to, but we put our emotions on them, and that's when they don't. They're like, well, I don't want to tell my parents because then they're going to cry. Then they're going to get upset.
They'll dismiss them because they want to fix them. It's hard to see our kids in distress. And so a lot of times when our kids are having hard emotions, we want to just fix it. But then that feels very dismissive. And so I think part of I think it's observing their emotion, sitting with them while they're experiencing the emotion. And then when it's over, you go have your own emotion of like, oh my gosh.
Right.
It's so hard.
And they may get
hurts my
over it.
heart to see my kids struggling like that. But you're not doing it at the same time that you're providing support to your own kid. So you can have the emotion of this is really hard, and I'm really struggling, and I'm frustrated about all of these different things. But you're there in that moment to tune in to what your child's having and supporting them, maybe by just listening, being a sounding board. And sometimes I was like, you know, I might have some ideas. Do you want some help, or you want some ideas, or do you want to just listen or hang out and snuggle? So part of it is taking your cues from them. And so we observe but don't absorb their emotions. But yes, of course, your emotions are kind of going to tank a little bit.
But also reminding ourselves that when our kids are in distress, they're learning something.
Right.
And so we wouldn't want them to never mess up or never have to figure out fight with friends. I mean, because it's how they learn. And that's what I do with my kids all the time. I remind myself, I'm like, do not jump in and save them. This is a learning experience. It doesn't mean that then I might not like come in and snuggle extra tight. And if they bring it up, then we start talking. And when they're done talking, like, you know, it's really, you have to be present to see the nonverbal cues. And you can feel, you know, with your kids, like, oh, I'm making this worse. Like, a lot of questions when someone's upset is very dysregulating.
Yeah.
Do not try to be a newspaper reporter with your kids. Don't. Why should just be struck from your vocabulary, because that makes kids a lot of defensive. If you ask why,
and it's just like, you
because
look,
they either may not know how to express what's going on, but sometimes if you say why, it's almost like, you know, like, is it wrong? They feel like, oh, well, if she's asking why, they might feel like somehow what they were experiencing or doing might have been wrong. And so I do a lot of observation. We kind of just talk about, oh, so this is what's going on. You
Be
were feeling
curious.
like this. Yes.
Curious.
And I will say, as parent of 3 teenage boys, parenting's a long haul. Parenting is a very long haul, and I think it's really important that any immediate struggle or things like that, sometimes whenever our kids are really hurting and it's not getting better right away, we're like, oh my gosh, what does this mean about their future, right? And I think it's really important to be able to take a step back so that we know that like kids can go through even months of really hard times.
I know I
and
did when I
still
was a
come
kid.
out of that and be successful as a human being. Not success, you know, like whatever your definition of success, but be healthy as a human being. And so take that perspective approach of, you know, this is really hard, but I'm going to stay the course so that I can help work through it with them when they need me.
And I think the biggest thing you want to have them feel or say is like, there's nothing you can say that I can't handle. Because they want to know you can handle anything. They don't need any more distress. And so I think that that's really important. And I think that it's like, you do really need to look for timing, and when someone's really upset, maybe you're just there, but you don't say anything, depending on the age and the type of person, or maybe you just say, hey, it looks like you're upset. Do you feel like talking, or would you rather not? You know, just a simple yes or no. And then respecting it.
Are you sure? Are you sure? Yeah.
And knowing that life is hard and growing up is full of struggles, and the pandemic has magnified this, and social media. Like, we know how hard it was to grow up without that. This is a whole new world, and that's why this is actually for parents, is because it's hard to really get it. But the world is
Changed.
very different, and the only reason I have a glimpse is because of my job.
Right.
Otherwise, I wouldn't have a clue. And it's okay. But that's where talking to one another helps too. And sometimes not talking. Not talking sometimes is the best thing you can do. So.
What other questions do you guys have?
Questions, like things.
Or just things that you want to say, like, this is the self-care that's worked for me. If you guys have any ideas about like what's been working for you.
I will share. I'm listening this week to Maria Shriver's anti-aging
Uh-huh.
seminar online, and it's so interesting. Everything you've said is everything that all of her speakers have said about aging. Deepak Chopra talked about hope. Goldie Hawn has written a book about the brain for children. When you referenced not knowing their brain or their feelings and emotions, it's all the same.
And Carron Young is coming out. She's an amazing clinician out of Australia, is coming out with a new book about the brain. And then I also like My Fantastic Elastic Brain. It's a really good one. And I mean, I think just really trying to normalize things for people, and you know.
Those are good. Those are good. It's
Yeah.
great that people are talking about this stuff so much more.
That's been one
positive
aspect, you know.
And I concur with the long haul. I have a 21 and a 26-year-old.
Okay.
So yeah, I don't think it ever ends.
I don't.
Right. You know,
I don't-
sometimes you know, my mom is you know, is still with us, and then I'm like, you know, and I call her like, you know, a couple times a week, and I just, you know, it never ends. It never ends, and I know that because I'm like, I know my mom worries about me. And
I still talk to my mom every day.
So, like,
So
you know, I can appreciate that it's a long haul.
I think the other thing that we forgot to mention that's super important, and we mentioned it in a lot of like different ways but not directly, is that interdependence is what people need, not independence. We've been pushing this like do it on your own, independence, but people need people, and interdependence, like as an adult, that's why you have a spouse or a roommate or get married. So letting your kids know that like needing someone else is not a weakness. It's the way our brains are designed, and it's also okay not to be okay. It doesn't mean something horrific is going to happen. It just means we need to change something. But I do think it's also important. There's the most unbelievable podcast on raising good humans. I love all of their podcasts about suicide prevention, but I just think every parent should read that will help lessen anxiety about that. And we can also send that along with some other things.
It's on our website.
Oh, yes, it is.
So if it's not on our website, let us know, and we'll see what we can do.
Yeah.
Because again, our primary goal is just to spread the word and be a resource for people.
You talked about importance of screen time safety, and I was wondering if you had some good resources that you really love for that. My kids are 7 and 11.
Okay, so they're a little bit younger,
Yeah.
but what I also would go ahead and have them do is there are a list of questions in this book that you ask yourself how you feel after doing certain things on screen time, and it's important for them to realize like how that feels in their body. Do you know what page that's on?
I don't.
But for 7 and 11, I teach my kids too
I think
that
it's social media that
too much time on it grows that part of our brain that wants things right away and that instant gratification, and then it ruins other stuff. So like anything, we
33.
need balance, because that's where it's so important to teach kids about how they can grow their brain to be the best for them. And even if they're like, what I say is, okay, no YouTube, you can watch a Netflix show that's an actual show, but not, you know, this scroll, doop, done with this, on to the next, that kind of a thing. And just trying to also, I know one of the things that we have done a lot more of is play actual games. Like,
right.
but with them, and they want to be with you. They really do. They just don't want to be with you when you're not there. Like if you're with them but you're doing all these other things, they don't want to be with you. They want to be with you when you're really with them.
Yeah. And if you're looking for like, I know you're like, is my kid safe? What do I do? When do I introduce a phone? I don't know if that was the nature of your question. I think Common Sense Media has a lot of really good stuff about different types of media, and they also do ratings of different apps and things like that.
But I think it's educating them too. Like,
Right.
this is what it does, or you might accidentally stumble across something that's kind of scary, and if that happens, tell me. And you won't be in trouble, but we need to figure it out. Because they need to know that social media can be used in a great way if you're looking up a cooking recipe or you're trying to be creative.
Right.
But you can find stuff that is too soon, too young, and too fast.
Right.
And so just educating them about that as well. And I think for younger kids, having them, when they're utilizing social media, be in a common space, just so you
Not
kind
even
of,
social media, but like
yeah,
YouTube.
that's
like,
well, that
I was gonna say,
consider
I don't
that
know.
social
I feel
media.
like when I think, I don't know. But like even watching YouTube or playing Roblox or gaming, you know, those things that also involve conversations, because they are. So my teenagers, you know, we have a living room, which really is now an office, and my two boys' computers are both down there. And it was great. The other day, like my 17-year-old was, I think he was playing Rocket League, but like I could hear him with his friends, and they're all having a discourse on politics. And so I'm not involved in that, but I'm hearing, you know, like I'm walking by, it's kind of there. So you can kind of, it's hard to keep screens out of kids' rooms because, you know, now they have an iPad, now they have, you know, but I do feel,
teach
right,
them how to be good consumers.
right, but I think it's also important to know that they don't have the regulation to just stop.
That's why you need
And
to
so-
set a timer or set
So
down
set up
time.
limits, right,
Set
I mean,
down time,
yeah.
it just shuts off after an amount of time.
But you have to agree upon it ahead of time.
Yes.
Just let them know what the expectations are and have that conversation with them. Like, you make the choice, but if you can get them on board and just say like, hey, these are what our ideas are, and so,
And
you
it's
know,
not a
how will it
punishment.
work?
We're doing this because we want you to grow into a happy, healthy adult.
Well, and their brains aren't equipped to deal with this yet, right? They're not equipped to
But
deal
they
with
don't
it. Like,
know
even,
that.
I think you were talking about, you know, when you gave your kids Messenger,
Mhm.
like, they were like, I don't like this. I don't like this. I don't like having this message and having to respond. You know, if you think about, you know, when we were growing up, like, you know, you could go outside and see if people are playing, but like,
You can get those breaks.
you don't get a break, right? And so that question about, you were like, oh, that doesn't make you feel good? Okay, well then let's take that away. That's not
right.
necessary.
And I think
Even though everybody was like, Messenger is the way that kids can stay connected.
And actually, at first, they played hide and seek on it. And it was really cute. But then it turned into this other thing, and it was like, okay,
We're done with that
we're
now.
done with that. And so, being flexible and taking cues.
And I'd also say that, like, thinking about, you know, using technology is a responsibility.
Mhm.
So you want to think about, okay, well, where is their maturity level? You know, what can they do? And I think that also speaks to, well, when do I allow them to do this, or when do I allow them to do that? And I
you
think
can-
it's important to look at that and build skills,
Mhm.
which is decision making.
And that's incentive
And
to
judgment.
build those skills. Because you
Right.
can say, when you can show me that you can do this, then I know you're ready for that.
Right.
You know?
Raising Good Humans has a great podcast that was recently about social media
Well,
and screens too.
Yes. That I think was last week.
Yeah, it was a week or two ago.
Mm-hmm. So these are all really good questions. And
there's no right answer. I think that's it.
it depends on, does your kid already have a brain that's hardwired to be more impulsive? I mean, the answer is different for everyone, but the key is it's not a punishment. You're doing it, it's a safety measure that you're doing to protect them. Just like we have safety measures for keeping our body safe, just like we have
Right.
safety measures for when we're in the car. This is just something that we talk about. So, and I apologize too, because I just looked at the time and.
Yep.
I know
Well,
that we have
anybody
to
who
go.
needs to go can go, but we will be happy to hang out and chat it all.
Thank you guys so
Thank
much.
you.
Welcome.
Hopefully this was
Information.
helpful. And, you know, we love doing this
How
stuff.
much
So
is this book?
I don't.
$16.95.
Okay.
Well, it's 18 something with tax, and we can send you a. I didn't
A
bring
link.
my square, but
But you can type it in through your phone.
I can send you a link.
We are releasing the book. We've been.
It is released,
Well, yes, but we haven't.
but it's not in the
done-
stores
We
yet.
haven't done our launches yet. They're coming up, and then